Quick reminder to keep it fresh in your head that I am making an honest to goodness movie, film, cinema, and the trailer for that will be out in May. At that point, you'll be able to donate. So get excited, get your wallets ready, and spread the word. So let's get into today's video, which is about another very powerful game element that we take for granted. Well, we don't take it for granted, we use it all the time, but we take for granted that it's part of the game, and we tend to not usually think about, hey, is this, a healthy component of skillful gameplay, or does this facilitate some, not so great stuff? This subject of switch moves does get more scrutiny than the other similar video I made recently, the one about entry hazards. Like, yeah, some people complain about hazards sometimes, but you never see anyone seriously campaigning to do something about them. Whereas, well, not as much as switch moves anyway, because you do have some people going like, Spike should only be, 1 to 2 layers in Gen 3 and stuff like that. But that's very rare. Whereas switch moves, by virtue of them being such an insanely powerful force for so many generations now, do tend to come under greater fire, especially since they seem to be getting better and better over time. So when we talk about switch moves, we generally start out in Gen 4. That's not when they were considered problematic, but it was the first time you had a switch move that actually did damage, right? And in the form of U-turn. Obviously, Baton Pass functions as a switch move in Gens 2 and 3, but by and large, BP was being used to pass boosts as opposed to scout the opponent's switch. Now, if you know anything about modern Advanced OU, then you know Baton Pass is incredibly common on Zapdos, and often on Celebi as well, but mostly on Zapdos. And Jolteon, of course, is never without it, pretty much. And they don't use it to pass boosts too often, especially in the case of Zapdos. It is literally just to scout the opponent's switch. And it was not always like that when Gen 3 was the current gen, or even for a while after. But as newer gens showed how strong switch moves were more and more, then the people playing Gen 3 were like, hey, we can kind of do this with Baton Pass. It's really good, even though you're not doing any damage with it. Just because very few of Zapdos' switch-ins are faster than it. So when you BP, you're always going first, so you're not risking getting hit before you BP out. And when you BP, you make the opponent unable to double switch on you safely. Because if the opponent goes to Blissey on your Zapdos, and you hard switch out to your Skarmory, then the opponent could switch to Magneton or something on that same turn and catch you unaware. But if you've got Zapdos against Blissey and you BP, and the Blissey user switches out to whatever, let's say Magneton, then you're not going to Skarmory because you see they switched to Magneton already. So it's just an incredibly powerful tool, not just for taking advantage of switches and for make sure that the opponent, that you're getting a one-up on whatever the opponent does. The opponent's not switching out if it's in a one-on-one situation like Zapdos on Blissey, and if the opponent switches, then you meet their switch perfectly. It also has other benefits, like seeing if the opponent is going to charge a Focus Punch that turn if you're facing off against a T-Tar or a Snorlax. Some people even said BP was too powerful as a switch move because it was facilitating such easy traps on Blissey with Dugtrio, and then entire teams would get shellacked by special attackers. Now, obviously, you have to be prepared for that eventuality if you're using a team with Blissey. But it is an example of just how powerful using a move that can switch is, as opposed to just hard switching. Because there's so much more risk when you are going to switch as opposed to using a move that can make you switch. The damage obviously makes it so much better, right? Like if Zapdos had U-turn in Gen 3, I can't even imagine that. That would be absolutely crazy. Because then in Gen 4, you've got U-turn. And, 70 base power bug, that's actually pretty good. Scizor was the most common Pokemon in the game from Platinum through the Salamence ban. And near the end of the generation, because it had such a powerful stab U-turn and of course bullet punch as well. But U-turn was a staple on pretty much everything that got it. Jirachi, Celebi, Infernape, Flygon of course, and even things like Azelf started using it once it started expanding its variety past just Sash Rocks Taunt Boom filler attacking moves. So yeah, U-turn is just so good because a lot of the time it's riskless. Because and I don't mean riskless as in if you always click U-turn you will never be punished for it. That's obviously not true. But if you have a free turn, like where the opponent is switching out, then you go with the U-turn and it doesn't matter what your opponent switches to, because no matter what, and this is simplified obviously, but your opponent is going to show you what they're switching to, and then you get to make your next selection, which is absolutely enormous. And of course, when you are not able to just scout their switch, but actually threaten them out and force damage on certain Pokemon, that's an even better example of a win-win. It's why Scizor was so good, because that stab U-turn smacked so many Pokemon and forced them out. So, and then you're chunking the opponent with damage before you switch out and replace them with another Pokemon. And obviously with hazards that goes crazy, and everyone that used a U-turn team was like, yeah, I get my rocks, maybe I also throw in spikes in there, because I mean Scizor is the most natural fit in the world for it, because look, you threaten out insert Pokemon here, right, which was a ton of Pokemon. Let's say Blissey is going to get forced out, right, and then the opposing Skarmory or Rotom comes in, takes the U-turn and gets chunked, and then immediately is forced out again with another Pokemon. So you've chunked them, you're forcing hazard damage, and so on. And if the Pokemon switching in, like Flygon was Scizor's favorite partner for a time, then you're U-turning again, and it goes over and over and over. Now, U-turn teams are always popular and effective, but it wasn't that you wanted to do nothing but spam U-turn necessarily, because the Pokemon that worked together were just good and they happened to fit U-turn in their moveset. It wasn't that you could just chain U-turn together forever most of the time. It did have its moments, obviously, but it wasn't anywhere near a consistent strategy. Enter Gen 5, where Volt Switch comes into the picture. And I cannot overemphasize the absolute hatred for the Volt Turn strategy when it was discovered during the final days of the final era of the Thundurus Excadrill metagame in Black and White 1, where it was just Rotom and Scizor Volt turning between each other because they answer each other's checks and counters so well. You can go to your Heatran or your Ground against Scizor, or your Skarmory against Scizor, then Rotom comes in, forces it out, and then you go to your Grass or your Lottie Twin or whatever, and over and over and over. And with Rocks, this was really irritating. Again, I cannot overemphasize, the standard Sand offense team wasn't a bunch of strong Pokemon that spammed, that were good on Sand anymore. It was a bunch of Pokemon that were spamming U-turn. I mean, it helped that the Pokemon that were spamming U-turn were incredible, since in addition to Rotom and Scizor, you also had Landorus Incarnate, who used Sand Force in Black and White 1. And then you had Celebi as a defensive Pokemon, but it also used U-turn. It's like, oh, is this Celebi going to give Heatran a free switch? Oh, nope, never mind. You turned out, and here comes Landorus. So the pressure was just ridiculous. And it was at its worst when Excadrill was around, and I have the RMT we'll pull up after this game. When Sandrush Excadrill was running loose, unrestrained on Sand teams. It was crazy because it was the best rapid spinner OU has ever seen, probably. And it was clearing the field, so you couldn't even punish the Volt Turners for switching around so much, right? And it was absolutely nuts because people were genuinely going, we have to do something about Volt Turn. And the one downside, of course, is, hey, well, they can't switch around forever with hazards, right? Well, yes, but the thing is they don't have to switch back and forth forever. It's more that they... because they're putting so much pressure on you. It's not like they're trying to outstall you like a stall team. It's more that before the hazards take their toll, on average anyway, then you are going to be beaten into submission, because a lot of the time, if you have that, the whole point is that whatever you switch to is going to get forced out or at least severely ruin. I mean, have fun keeping your Skarm in on Rotom Wash if you want. That's not going to lead to very good results a lot of the time. So people were looking for all sorts of antidotes, or solutions to the Volturn problem, but it was ridiculous. Then Black and White 2 came around, and we got Rough Skin Rocky Helmet Garchomp, and that curbed it a little bit. But I mean, it was there to stay. That Volturn was one of the most powerful strategies around. Anyway, rather than go, this game doesn't have much more Volturn to it, I don't think. Yeah. Oh no, there's a couple more U-turning. Yeah. But Volt Switch is obviously incredible because it increases the amount of Pokemon that can be hit significantly, super effectively with a Switch move. So you've got a ton of coverage with both Electric and Bug, and of course, you know, they have other things besides just that. So I mean, obviously, Heatran can take both U-turn and Volt Switch quite well, but it's the other moves that are going to cause a problem for it. So there's also the interesting dichotomy, which we will definitely get into more later. But it's more fast Volt Switch and U-turn versus slow. And fast is obviously good because if you have a fast U-turn, and this is why people use Scarf Scizor a lot, because you have a fast U-turn, you can threaten things like the Lottie Twins and Alakazam no matter how low on health you are. But slow Volts, or any slow Switch moves in general, they're really good because if you have that one-on-one where you want to get one of your teammates in, and you don't want them to take a hit coming in, then you let your Pokemon on the field take that hit, and then boom, presto, you got your big hitter on the field for free. So obviously, fast Volturn can do this too, but they do it off forcing switches. Like Rotom forces in so and then Mega Medicham hits the field on the switch. But a slow, and this is obviously very common in the case of things like Volt Switch Magearna or Teleport Slow Twins, that was a pretty big one. But yeah, they love taking hits for their teammates and then getting them in for free. So that is an important distinction, especially when we get to Gen 8. So yeah, here's Sir Azelf for Dark Azelf. He played on both names. You know, this was the original team. The sprites are all messed up because it's a very old thread. But Scizor, C-Band, Scarflando, a lot of people wound up using Expert Bell. And, yeah, I mean, this team became really, really strong, or really, really popular, rather, I should say, after, this is a Celebi. Even after Excadrill's ban, people just replaced it with Terrakion. It's like, yeah, okay, hazards are going to be a problem, but they are also piling on so much huge damage within a short amount of time because of how easy Volt turning to Terrakion is for huge damage. Choice Band Terrakion, one of the scariest Pokemon ever. This is a metagame without Landorus Therian, by the way, in Black and White 1. And of course, once Landorus Therian comes around, then it becomes even more controversial because Landorus Therian is a great U-turn user itself. So here's this other old thread I found. I remember actually, I posted it. But yeah, people have been arguing about U-turn being busted for at least since Gen 5. Nobody was seriously arguing for U-turn being busted in Gen 4. Now, a lot of people would say, hey, isn't the problem just Stealth Rock? Or like U-turn in conjunction with trapping, because a lot of players had problems with Genesect U-turning into Dugtrio. I mean, look, Genesect was crazy broken anyway. So was Torn Therian, so was Lando Incarnate, even without U-turn. But generally, it made it even harder to play around them because they just clicked the U-turn, especially Genesect, obviously, because it had stab and the download boost and all that crazy stuff. But it was generally so easy to just click U-turn and then you have win-win scenarios. I mean, you could stack them on Rocky helmets and things like that, but not always. I mean, you don't want to switch Garchomp into Genesect just to try and ship it because look at Ice Beamed and now you're dead. So that was just Genesect being busted. But in general, people were having issues with U-turn being, or the switch moves in general, chaining together with Volt Switch and yeah. So then in Gen 6 it continued. I mean, see, and it really became an adaptation of how we play the game, because previously, before switch moves became super popular, then like big wall breakers with little defensive presence like Nidoking in this example were very difficult to slot on teams, because yeah, okay, it's really hard to switch into and it's probably going to KO something if it gets on the field, but you only get it on the field through double switches. And I mean, sure, if you can pull that off, that's great. Very skillful and all that, but with it's still riskier than running something with natural defensive utility. Now, okay, Nidoking still has some defensive utility in Gen 6 in that it switches into Clefable pretty well, but on average, you still want it to hit the field a little more besides that. And with Volt Turn support, then it's just the easiest thing in the world. You get free switches after free switches on free switches, pretty much. So, and this is not just Nidoking. It's every big wall breaker from Mega Medicham to Kyurem Black to whatever you want to think of. So, yeah, this is a big change in how you play the game. And another thing about the risklessness of it was, we're going to skip through this one because you pretty much get the idea. But about U-turn often being very riskless and safe. Okay, that was actually a funny example because the U-turn there meant that he got more, Kosan got more health from Pain Split. So that was one of the rare examples of a switch move not being it in a vacuum. But like, I want to skip to later in this game. I do love this game though. I've seen it many times. But okay, and you see even here, like, it gets that burn on Tangrowth, right? This is an AV Tangrowth, so the Volt Switch itself is not doing a lot. I mean, even with the crit. But it's the burn on top of the free Volt Switch. Because, if Lando comes in, who cares? What's Lando going to do to stop this Rotom? And that's just a free Volt or Will-O-Wisp again. So eventually, Tangrowth is going to I mean, unless you think you're going to PP stall Volt Switch and Will-O-Wisp between switching back and forth between Lando and Tangrowth forever, like, sure, that'll happen. Also, at some point, Rotom can just unleash Hydro Pump and chip Tangrowth a little more. So, point being, Rotom gets the free burn on Tangrowth, and then it also rubs the extra bit of Volt Switch chip into it, like even without the crit. And it's very, very, very free. I mean, Lando ran away from that matchup, so forget stopping it. So, with that extra chip, that kind of little thing adds up, especially with how easy it is to chain these together. So, Jirachi, Rocks, Gravity. God, I love. Yeah. Great Devil Switch from TDK. Stealth Rock. Look. Oh no, that's not what I was thinking. See, there's the U-turn, and now I think, does he slow turn here, or does he body slam? No, he body slams again. But even like here, see, another super free. Oh, I guess he didn't U-turn there. I thought he was going to. Okay, so instead of the super free U-turn there, then he U-turns out of Slowbro and chips it even harder. So, and now here's Rotom. Again, Volt Switch, U-turn, chaining together. So, like with the Entry Hazards video, I don't necessarily know that switch moves are too much for the game, or they're unhealthy, or whatever. I mean, I do think they're a little too easy to use sometimes. They're so powerful. But even if the answer is yes, they're good for the game, they're skillful, healthy, whatever, and then, like, if that's the case with Entry Hazards, so be it. It's just good to think about these things, to consider their place in the game. Because it's often through the consideration of stuff we take for granted that we find not just stuff that's broken necessarily, but even just new strategies. Like, hey, this, like, look at the BP Zapdos example in Gen 3. People were going, hey, this switch move stuff is really good. And half the time it's not even about the damage. Yeah, I'm going to use offensive BP Zapdos some more. Before that, then offensive Zapdos was used, but BP was far from the near given it is on it now. I'm not saying BP-less offensive Zapdos doesn't exist now, but I'm saying that BP went from being, oh, that's something you can use on offensive Zapdos, to being, oh yeah, that's something you almost certainly need on offensive, or almost certainly want on offensive Zapdos. You pretty much have to really justify the other moves over BP, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, Volt Switch, chunking, everything. I wanted to get to this late game scenario. Another free U-turn? Oh no, it just knocked off for the KO. There's Heat Wave, and yeah, so in this scenario, basically then it's just U-turning back and forth no matter, or almost no matter what. That's a great late game. I just love this battle in general. Nice move there. Rocks. Yeah, so now I just like this little thing where they just keep U-turning back and forth between Jirachi and Tornadus. Yeah, this game sure had a lot of switch moves in it. So Gen 6 was a big deal about the switch moves, and then Gen 7 just gets more and more switchy. We're not going through this whole game because it's really long, but it's another great example of there's no Magearna in this game. Magearna is and like or Tapu Koko even, but it's just even putting things like U-turn on Gliscor gives it so much in terms of the ability to get momentum, to maintain momentum, to provide free switch-ins for its teammates. Because between Scizor and Gliscor and Tornadus U-turning everywhere, then you've got this great defensive core, first of all, especially alongside Toxapex. But with the triple U-turn, then you've got these two big wall breakers with Tapu Lele and Hoopa. And of course, Hoopa is even stronger with Tapu Lele support. And normally you'd be like, yeah, okay, that's great, but they're not the sturdiest Pokemon to get on the field. And with these guys, you have a great defensive core. It's like, oh, you're taking hits and you're getting your big hitters on the field for free. So this is a really long game, but I think by the end, Star was like genuine. It was one of the few times I've ever seen someone get close to running out of U-turns. And close is a relative term. It's still not very close. So here's a great example of the certainty of U-turn with the slow turn. See, because here he slow turns, and if the Garchomp Z Dragons or whatever, then it's like, okay, well, he used up the Z Dragon. I know that, so now I can move freely. So now, if the Chomp SD'd there to get that +2 hit on Scizor, you don't go to Scizor. You go right to Tornadus Therian, and you threaten the Z Flying. And you even have the little bit of chip with of U-turn. I mean, you think Gliscor U-turn on something as bulky as Garchomp, that's not going to matter, but little percentages matter in Pokemon so much. So, and now it's subbed. It's like, okay, well, it's subbed, so now I go to Scizor. If it doesn't boost, who cares? If it does boost, then I get another slow U-turn. And see, the slow U-turn is key here, because you take the hit if he attacks, and if he SDs like he does, now you go to Torn, and now you have the Z Flying. And if he switches out, then fine, because he just took 25% of his health and did 0 damage. So, yeah, knockoff, U-turn. See, look, there's U-turn, and now something as defensively not great as Hoopa is in for free. I mean, like, things like a Crawdon in Oris with, like, 0 defensive presence are good, not just because of how dangerous they are offensively, but also because how easy it is to get them on the field through switch moves. I mean, it's very rare you see teams without such enormously powerful wall breakers, without a lot of switch move support. And that's why it's something that you should consider. It's like, all right, well, first of all, to build teams with big wall breakers with switch move support so they actually hit the field. That's a part of real Pokemon. It's like, okay, I have this big hitter, but how am I actually going to make sure in a real battle scenario that I'm going to make sure the big hitter gets on the field? And the answer to that is pretty much switch moves. The right switch move partners, obviously. Yeah, so that's a big one, but it's something to consider. It's like, because sometimes people say, oh, it feels so much harder to keep the threats in check now, but it's not like the threats are that much stronger than their previous gen counterparts. Like since Gen 5, let's say, like, yeah, okay, you get some Mega Pokemon, but you also lose Permanent Weather, and Hydro Pump and Fire Blast and Draco Meteor are a little weaker, stuff like that. So it seems relatively even, but why does it feel like it's constantly harder? And if you think about it, it's like, yeah, maybe switch moves have something to do with that. So here Gliscor is just rocking and outstalling. Oh, it got toxic, so yeah, there's a lot of switch move stuff going here. That Moonblast did 55 to Excadrill. Good lord. Tapu Lele is strong. Yeah, so we're just going to skip through this one because, holy long. look at all that U-turn PP. We're on turn 101. We've got 5 from Scizor. Yeah, about 15 from Gliscor. And... oh, 7. I was like, does that not have a U-turn in its moveset? But no, it's 7. So yeah, there's and several more in the subsequent turns. And now the rocks are up and da-da-da. So like in the entry hazards video I was talking about, yeah, a lot of the power of entry hazards, it dictates games, dictates the way we use our other tools, and switch moves are one of the most impactful versions of that. But of course, you don't necessarily need hazards up to have your switch moves be impactful. Because, like, in the case of something like Hoopa or Specs Lele, it's not like, oh, well, my rocks are up. Now my Hoopa is threatening. It's like, no, as soon as Hoopa is on the field, things are potentially dying, or Lele or whatever. Or CB Crawdon, if we're going back to Oris, or Specs Hydreigon, or Kieran Black, whatever. So that's really big. And also in Gen 8, where a lot of teams sometimes didn't even run rocks because everything's running boots. And still, the switch moves are just so important for positioning, and we are just going to skip through the rest of this one because we have one more game I think we want to get to. And that is, of course, Gen 8. Good lord, I forgot how long this one was. Oh, only not even 200 turns, never mind. Yeah, so we got 8 U-turns from Scizor. Yeah, see, this is what I mean by relatively. Still, 10 U-turns is a lot, but 22 U-turns used, that's crazy. And 17 from Tornadus. So, you know, that's insane. And from... oh, John W. didn't have any. But yeah, nuts. So, we now go to Gen 8. And I just picked like the first game I found from when Cinderace was still around. And Magearna too, I forgot about that. But yeah, this is... in Gen 8 you have Teleport added to the mix. And also Flip Turn, but you don't see Flip Turn as much in OU. I think it's more of a UU and below kind of move. Because you got a lot of other bulky waters there. And in Gen 8, obviously, you have Teleport, which is just the freest thing ever, because not just the users of it being the Slow Twins with Regenerator, obviously that plays a huge part, but also the slow, or the negative priority factor, which is also why Blissey and Chansey were so good at it, because they take nothing from moves, so if it's a one-on-one, you're not taking much damage, and you are able to get the big hitter in for free. And obviously, heavy-duty boots play a big factor in this because hazards are just almost completely out of the picture now in terms of being able to keep the volt switchers or volt turners in check, because you throw. I mean, something like Cinderace is obviously an extreme example, but I mean even Slowking. I mean, it just famously lives forever with boots and Slack Off and Regenerator. So you have to withstand the switch move assault for a long, long, long time, and that's kind of an issue. So yeah, the boots thing just exacerbates it to oft unpleasant levels. And does the Icicle Spear? No, not quite, but neither is Iron Head getting the KO there. Anyway, so Cinderace was obviously a ridiculous example, but just the way it, I mean, this kind of speaks for itself. And with the impossibility of wearing down the Volt Turn Teleport gang, then this new term came about, because you just had to throw in your own Regenerator pokes, your Pecs and whatnot, and you had to withstand what was referred to by the tournament community as the Vortex, because it was just, your head was spinning because it was switch move after switch move after switch move. It was teleport into Volt Switch into U-turn into another U-turn into teleport into U-turn, and your head's spinning. It was the Vortex. And then you get, obviously Future Sight was in conjunction with Teleport is crazy. I mean, you saw it there. I mean, not only do you get your big breakers like Kartana on the field safely, but you also support them with Future Sight, which is crazy tough to deal with. So, yeah, Gen 8 was definitely when it was at its peak, or at its nadir, if you look at it more negatively. But yeah, I mean, look at those rocks. They're going to do approximately nothing to Cinderace. And Lando U-turns again, and in comes Cinderace, unencumbered by Stealth Rock. I mean, okay, Sand, sure, but now Cinderace is in for free. The fact that Cinderace got in for free was not just because of boots, obviously, but it's so frail. I mean, forget hazards, it can't take hits at all. But it was so regularly at 100% health because, or even something like Weavile, which wound up being like the biggest threat in the tier. Because yes, okay, boots made Weavile ridiculous, but why was Weavile? And it actually had a surviving amount of survivability in the face of opposing attacks with boots. Like it actually had defensive use, which is kind of hilarious. But it was also getting free turn after free turn because of switch moves. So again, I don't know that switch moves are necessarily bad for the game or that they're broken or whatever, but they are very easy to use, and yeah, so I, again, don't have a hard answer, but I would just ask that you consider the place switch moves have in our lovely game. And even just considering that will, open your mind, and, it might give you a new idea for a team. Like, hey, I haven't seen switch moves done like this. Or you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just be like, oh, I want to use switch moves like this to enable this because it's a good strategy. It's robust against the metagame. Today's movie recommendation. I'm looking at my DVD collection. I'm going to suggest the original My Bloody Valentine. It is a great, great fun slasher movie. That's the second slasher recommendation in a row, but it's great and it's a lot of fun. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.